He told me he could kill me at any time, that he would always find me, that I would always be his wife. Monique Tepe, as recounted by a close friend to Columbus investigators, it started with a mistake. A simple, devastating mistake. On the morning of December 30th, 2025, Spencer Tepe's colleagues at Athens Dental Depot grew worried. Their boss, punctual, dedicated, never a no-show, hadn't arrived for work. Calls to Spencer went unanswered. Calls to his wife, Monique, went straight to voicemail. Growing alarm prompted his employer, who was on vacation that day, to dial 911 at 8:58 in the morning and request a welfare check at the couple's home on the 1400 block of North 4th Street in Columbus, Ohio's Wineland Park neighborhood. A Columbus police officer was dispatched immediately, but here is where fate delivered its cruelest twist. The officer went to the wrong address. 40 minutes. 40 critical minutes elapsed before anyone with a badge stood at the right door. When they finally did, what they found inside that quiet Wineland Park home would shatter a community, launch one of the most intense investigations in Columbus history, and pull back the curtain on a decade-long shadow of terror that one woman had been living with in silence, in fear, long before her neighbors ever knew her name. Monique Tepe, 39 years old, mother of 2 boys, was dead. Her husband, Spencer, 37, was dead beside her. Their children, a 4-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son, were alive, wandering the house alone with the family dog, unaware that their entire world had just ended. The city of Columbus would not sleep easily again for 11 days. To understand what happened on December 30th, 2025, you must first understand who Monique Tepe was and who she had fought so hard to become. Monique Sabatersky was born on October 14, 1986, in Chicago, Illinois. When she was just 1 year old, her family relocated to Worthington, Ohio, a suburban community north of Columbus. She grew up there, playing soccer, running track, riding horses on weekends. She was the kind of kid teachers remembered. She went on to Ohio State University, where she earned a master's degree in early childhood education. She cared about how children learned. She cared about nurturing minds that were just beginning to understand the world. But Monique's path to happiness was not a straight line. It was, as she herself described it, quite a journey. In August 2015, she married a man named Michael David McKee, a vascular surgeon based in Illinois. The marriage, by all accounts, began crumbling almost immediately. Less than 2 years later, in May 2017, Monique filed for divorce under her maiden name, Sabatersky. The divorce was finalized the following month. What came out later, in the words of her closest friends speaking to police detectives, painted a picture far darker than a simple incompatibility. Witnesses told investigators that Monique had confided in them about abuse, that McKee had forced unwanted sex upon her, that he had strangled her, that he had looked her in the eyes during their marriage and told her, calmly, deliberately, that he could kill her at any time, that he would find her wherever she went, that she would always be his wife. She left anyway. She rebuilt anyway. By 2018, Monique had found her way forward. She met Spencer Tepe through an online dating app, the modern courtship of countless bad bumble dates, wrong relationships, and waterfalls of tears, as she would later describe it in her wedding vows. Spencer was a dentist from Cincinnati, Ohio, a graduate of Ohio State University who specialized in comprehensive care and implant therapy. He spoke Spanish fluently, played golf, loved soccer, and had a warmth that his colleagues described as rare in any profession. Monique and Spencer married in 2020. They moved into a home in Wineland Park, a neighborhood just north of downtown Columbus. They had a daughter in 2022, a son in 2024. They coached the 4-year-old at soccer on weekends. They were, by every account from friends and family, genuinely, deeply happy. But something else was happening, something Monique likely sensed before she could prove it. Something building in the background, patient and cold, like a storm forming over the horizon. December 6, 2025, 3 weeks and 3 days before Christmas. Monique and Spencer had traveled to Indianapolis, Indiana, for the Big Ten championship football game. They went with friends, a group outing, festive, the kind of day couples look forward to. The stadium was full, the energy electric. By halftime, Monique Tepe was gone. She had quietly slipped out of the stands and returned to the hotel. Spencer, when friends later asked where she was, offered an explanation that now reads like prophecy. She was upset about something involving her ex-husband. What Monique knew, or feared, in that moment has never been fully explained. But what surveillance cameras captured that same day, back in Columbus, told investigators everything they needed to understand. On December 6, 2025, footage showed a man approaching the Tepe residence on North 4th Street. He moved through the rear alley. He entered what legal documents would later describe as the curtilage of the property, the area immediately surrounding the home, including the yard and driveway. He spent time there, moving deliberately, casing the layout. Then he left. McKee was not on his work schedule that day at OSF St. Anthony Medical Center in Rockford, Illinois, some 300 miles away. He had made the drive to Columbus and spent time inside the perimeter of his ex-wife's home, while she and her husband sat in a football stadium in Indiana. When investigators later pulled that surveillance footage and scrutinized it frame by frame, they would recognize the figure. But that revelation was still weeks away. On December 6th, the Tepes came home from Indianapolis, put the children to bed, and life resumed, temporarily, at least, as normal. The window of death was 3 hours wide. Investigators would eventually determine that Monique and Spencer Tepe were killed sometime between 2 and 5 in the morning on December 30th, 2025. The most refined estimate placed the likely moment of the attack at approximately 3:52 a.m., a precise, devastating timestamp extracted from layers of physical evidence, forensic analysis, and digital data that detectives would spend days assembling. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever came through that door did not break it down. They either possessed a method of quiet entry or they were familiar enough with the home to exploit a vulnerability. No firearm was found at the scene. The killer had taken the weapon with them when they left, which itself told detectives something crucial. This was not the act of someone who lost control. This was planned. This was methodical. What the Franklin County Coroner's Office later confirmed in autopsy reports was staggering in its brutality. Spencer Tepe, 37 years old, had been shot 7 times. In the head, the neck, the torso, and his upper extremities. Monique Tepe, 39 years old, had been shot 9 times. One of those shots had been fired at close range, execution close. Toxicology revealed no alcohol or illicit drugs in either victim's system. Monique had traces of an antidepressant and an antihistamine in her bloodstream, consistent with medications a physician might prescribe. 3 spent 9mm shell casings were recovered from the crime scene. The children were found physically unharmed, alone in the house with the family dog in the grey quiet of that December morning, waiting for parents who would never answer their calls. At 9:40 a.m. on December 30th, police finally reached the right home. What responding officers found on the 2nd floor of the Wineland Park house stopped them cold. At 10:11 a.m., Columbus Fire Department Medic 7 formally pronounced Monique and Spencer Tepe dead at the scene. Columbus Police Chief Elaine Bryant was briefed immediately. Within hours, the story had broken across local news. By evening, it had gone national. A dentist and his wife murdered in their beds while their 2 toddlers slept or wandered nearby. No suspect, no weapon, no motive disclosed, no signs of forced entry. The city went quiet with unease. From the very beginning, police suspected this was not random. The calculation of it, the clean entry, the targeting of a couple in their home at 4 in the morning, the removal of the weapon, suggested purpose. Chief Bryant told reporters the case was definitely disturbing and complex, and that investigators were pursuing every angle. She acknowledged carefully that it remained an open question whether the couple had been targeted. But veteran detectives know what a targeted killing looks like. They knew. Meanwhile, the Columbus police received an avalanche of tips as the story spread. Every tip was logged. Everyone was followed. And somewhere in that mountain of information, investigators began to hear a name mentioned more than once. A name from Monique's past. A name that a handful of her closest friends brought up unprompted when detectives came to ask questions about who might have wanted to harm her. Michael McKee. On January 5, 2026, 6 days after the murders, the Columbus Division of Police made a strategic decision. They released surveillance video to the public. The footage was brief, haunting in its simplicity. It showed a figure dressed in dark clothing, wearing a hooded jacket, light-colored pants, walking through the alley directly behind the Tepe home. The timestamp placed the figure there between 2 and 5 Rikis and M on December 30th. The same window investigators had established for the killings. The figure moved with purpose, not rushed, not frantic, walking, deliberate. Chief Bryant confirmed that police believed this person was present in the vicinity during the time the couple was killed. She stopped carefully short of calling them a suspect. The release was calculated, a balance between generating public tips and not poisoning a potential jury pool. But the footage served another purpose. It began to apply pressure. It told whoever walked that alley that their image existed, that someone had captured them. That time was moving. Jennifer Coffindaffer, a former FBI agent and law enforcement analyst, noted publicly that whoever committed this crime had clearly studied the location in advance. It was also very clear, she said, they knew where the camera locations were because they evaded a lot of camera coverage. But they hadn't evaded all of it. Detectives were already working a second thread, the vehicle. Witnesses and cameras in the neighborhood had captured something else, a silver SUV, distinctive enough to identify, that had been seen in the area surrounding the Tepe home in the hours before the murders. And crucially, the same vehicle had been seen pulling away from the neighborhood in the period immediately after. Investigators began the painstaking work of tracing it. What they found would break the case open. Every investigator working a vehicle lead knows the process is slow, meticulous, and often maddening. But in this case, the silver SUV left a trail. The vehicle had a distinctive feature, a visible sticker on one of its windows. It was the kind of detail that gets overlooked in casual glance, but stands out when you're reviewing footage frame by frame, building a timeline. Detectives catalogued the SUV's appearances across multiple surveillance cameras in and around the Wineland Park neighborhood. Then they began running the license plates. What they found was brazen. At different times, the vehicle had been bearing stolen license plates, one from Ohio, one from Arizona. Swapped plates are a classic countermeasures move, designed to throw off automated license plate readers and human investigators alike. It reflected planning, sophistication. The decision to use stolen plates did not suggest impulsivity. It suggested someone who had thought about consequences and taken deliberate steps to avoid them. But the vehicle itself had specific features that didn't change. And those features, combined with the plate histories, allowed detectives to trace the SUV's registered origins. When they ran the associations, two addresses kept appearing. McKee's former home address and his current work address at OSF St. Anthony Medical Center in Rockford, Illinois. The thread was tightening. On January 9, 2026, 10 days after the murders, investigators located the silver SUV. It was sitting in the parking lot of the very hospital where Michael McKee worked in Rockford. But something had changed. The window sticker, That distinctive, identifying mark visible in every piece of surveillance footage from Columbus had been removed. In its place, fresh scrape marks on the glass. Someone had peeled it off after the fact. Someone had attempted to alter the vehicle's appearance. That someone, police were now certain, was Michael David McKee. While vehicle investigators were working Rockford, digital forensics analysts were examining another critical thread: McKee's cell phone. Cell phones, in modern investigations, function as electronic alibis or electronic indictments. They ping towers, register app activity, generate timestamps that can place a person in a location or, critically, document their conspicuous absence from one. Investigators obtained McKee's phone data and found something that stopped them cold. From December 29th through noon on December 30th, a period spanning roughly 17 hours, McKee's phone had remained stationary at the hospital in Illinois. No calls, no activity. The device sat, unused, in Rockford. For a 39-year-old professional in 2025, 17 consecutive hours of complete phone inactivity is not just unusual. It is virtually impossible, unless it is intentional. McKee's phone had been left behind, deliberately, investigators concluded, to create the impression that he had never left Illinois. It was a digital alibi, manufactured and planted. The kind of move that requires premeditation. The kind of move that requires someone to have thought in advance about what investigators would look for. Investigators calculated the driving distance between Rockford, Illinois, and Columbus, Ohio, approximately 7 hours each way. The math aligned with chilling precision. A late-night departure on December 29th, an arrival in Columbus well before 2 a.m. on the 30th. Time enough to do what was done. A drive back north. The phone reactivating at noon on the 30th, as if nothing had happened. The timeline fit, every piece of it. January 10th, 2026. 11 days after the murders. Federal agents and local law enforcement converged on Rockford, Illinois, with arrest warrants signed and ready. They did not find Michael McKee at the hospital. They found him at a Chick-fil-A restaurant near his workplace. A vascular surgeon eating lunch, apparently unaware that the net had fully closed around him. He was taken into custody without incident and booked into the Winnebago County Jail. 2 counts of murder. Columbus Police Chief Elaine Bryant stepped to the podium that day with the composure of someone who had waited 11 days to say exactly what she was about to say. "We believe at this point we have the person responsible for the murders of Monique and Spencer Tepe, and that person is Michael McKee." She confirmed it was a targeted attack. She confirmed it was domestic violence related. She confirmed that McKee was Monique's ex-husband. She was careful not to say more than the investigation could support at that moment. Unwilling, she explained, to jeopardize the ultimate conviction. McKee waived his right to an extradition hearing. On January 20th, 2026, he was transported back to Ohio and booked into the James A. Carnes Correctional Center in Franklin County. Search warrants executed at McKee's Chicago condominium had already yielded what investigators needed next: multiple weapons. When ballistics analysts ran the firearms through the national database, one of them returned a hit, a preliminary match, linking the gun to the shell casings found at the Tepe home on North 4th Street, the murder weapon found in the killer's apartment. Once McKee was in Ohio, the investigation entered its most detailed and prosecutorial phase. The Franklin County grand jury convened. Forensic and digital evidence was catalogued, cross-referenced, and presented. What emerged was a portrait of a crime that had been months in the making. The December 6th surveillance footage, McKee on the Tepe property while the couple was in Indianapolis, was not the opportunistic act of a troubled man driving by. It was reconnaissance. He had made the 7-hour round trip on a day he wasn't scheduled to work, to walk the perimeter of his ex-wife's home, to study the layout, to identify entry and exit points, to understand the camera coverage, to plan. The stolen license plates revealed calculation. A man who steals not one, but 2 different sets of plates, one from Ohio, one from Arizona, and swaps them at different points, is a man who is managing risk across a timeline. This was not a single impulsive act, it was a campaign. The phone left behind was the clearest tell. Whoever planned this crime understood that cell phone data would be among the first evidence points investigators examined. They understood it well enough to deliberately neutralize it. That required technical awareness, that required the kind of intelligence a surgeon, or any highly educated professional, would possess. The close-range shot among Monique's 9 gunshot wounds, the 7 shots fired into Spencer, the complete absence of defensive wounds consistent with a struggle that had warning. The couple, in all likelihood, were asleep when it began. On January 16, 2026, a Franklin County grand jury returned its indictment. 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. 3 of the aggravated murder charges carried specifications alleging the use of an automatic firearm or silencer, explaining how, in a neighborhood of sleeping families, the sound of 9 shots and 7 shots never woke a single neighbor. A suppressor, another pre-planned detail, another deliberate choice. When the affidavit was finally unsealed in late January 2026, the full dimensions of what Monique Tepe had been living with came into focus. And what emerged was not a story that began on December 30th. It was a story that began years earlier and never truly ended. Not with the divorce, not with the new marriage, not with the children, not with the life she had built with such effort and such love. Witnesses who had known Monique during and after her marriage to McKee told detectives the same things, independently, in separate interviews. He had forced sexual acts on her against her will. He had strangled her. He had made a specific threat, a threat so precise and so possessive that it functioned less like an expression of anger and more like a declaration of ownership. He told her he could kill her at any time. He told her he would always find her. He told her he would buy the house next door to wherever she went. He told her she would always be his wife. Monique had heard those words. She had carried them. She had built a life anyway, a full, loving, genuinely joyful life by every account, but she had never been fully free of the weight of them. On December 6th, when she quietly slipped out of the football stadium at halftime and went back to the hotel, her husband told friends she was upset about something involving her ex-husband, something she had sensed or seen or feared, something she couldn't shake that day in Indianapolis. 24 days later, Michael McKee allegedly came through the door of her home at 4 in the morning with a suppressed firearm and carried out the threat he had made years before. On January 23, 2026, Michael David McKee appeared in Franklin County Common Pleas Court, virtually via closed-circuit television, his face pixelated across courthouse monitors. The charges were read aloud. 4 counts of aggravated murder with firearm specifications, 1 count of aggravated burglary. His defense attorney, Diane Menashe, waived bond. McKee entered his plea, not guilty. The courtroom absorbed the words. The city of Columbus absorbed them. Monique's family, who had already buried 2 people they loved in a visitation attended by more than 1,000 people, absorbed them and turned their focus toward what came next. The case would go forward. The evidence, the surveillance footage, the vehicle tracking, the ballistics match, the phone data, the eyewitness accounts of threats and abuse, the physical forensics from the Tepe home, would be assembled into a prosecution. The suppressor, the stolen plates, the reconnaissance visit on December 6th, the 7-hour drive that a phone left at a hospital was meant to erase. It could not be erased. In her wedding vows, captured in footage her family shared with the world, Monique Tepe had spoken directly to Spencer. She described the journey to find him, the wrong turns, the tears, the prior relationship and its shadow. And then she described what it felt like to have finally arrived somewhere worth arriving. The case against Michael David McKee proceeded toward trial. The two children Monique and Spencer left behind were in the care of Spencer's family. A 4-year-old girl, a 1-year-old boy, alive because, for whatever reason, in the calculus of that pre-dawn attack, whoever entered that home left them breathing. The grand jury had spoken. The evidence had been gathered. The verdict of a trial jury awaited. Michael David McKee was indicted by a Franklin County grand jury on January 16, 2026, on 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. He has pleaded not guilty. As of the time of this documentary's compilation, criminal proceedings in Franklin County, Ohio, are ongoing. The case has not yet gone to trial.